Hello guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Path of Exile Tutorials. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be going over some more basic stuff for those who are still getting into Path of Exile 2 and just need some, information on how things work. The first thing that we're going to be covering is skill gems. Skill gems are kind of complicated. There's a lot to them in terms of, what's going on and how they function. And I'd like to break them down into sections for you guys so you can really understand how they work and the unique setups for them. All right. So this support gem or skill gem panel, which you can open by pressing G, by the way. I'm not sure what it is if you're on console, but in this particular case, we're going to be talking about the different types of skill gems. So first off, we have regular skill gems. These are ones that you can create. Creatable. We also have basic skill gems. Now, basic skill gems are not creatable. Not creatable. And there's a difference with how these function, and we're going to talk about the overall change in how they function. There's also spirit gems, which are creatable. And there are also versions of the spirit gems which are also considered basic spirit gems. And again, these are not creatable. Now you might be asking what I mean by a non-creatable skill. Well, a non-creatable skill is something like Encased in Jade. Encased in Jade is not a gem that I put inside my equipment. It is a skill that I gain through other means. Like, for instance, in this particular case, I'm utilizing Jade Heritage, which is grants the skill Encased in Jade. Now, the thing about granted skills is that granted skills do not allow you to increase or decrease their total number of slots. So you basically get free slots, or rather free gem, what is the term that they use in this game? Gem sockets. So these are gem sockets, and the gem sockets essentially allow you to put in support gems, which is a whole other category, by the way. We'll talk about support gems as well. In fact, let's go ahead and put that on the list. Now, with support gems specifically, they are usually tied to tags, and they could, of course, can be creatable. Now, these are also found as well, so there are unique support gems. These are called lineage, I believe is the term. And lineage are found. They are found gems. Now, this particular thing means is that you have a certain number of sockets, right? And a certain number of sockets means you can support your ability in specific ways. In the case of Shred, because Shred is a basic attack that comes with being a werewolf, it does not come with the ability to increase the number of sockets. Now, when you first create a skill gem, for instance, if I were to just create one right now and just make something random like Infernal Cry, and I put this on my bar, you'll notice that it starts with only 2 sockets. It can be increased by utilizing specific items. There are 3 specific items in the game that are utilized to increase the number of sockets. Number 1 is the Lesser Jeweler's Orb, which will give you 3 sockets. There is the Greater Jeweler's Orb, which will give you 4 sockets, and there is the Perfect Jeweler's Orb, which will give you a total of 5 sockets. You do not have to use them in order. You used to have to use them in order, but you do not have to use them in order anymore. At this point, since the change that they made, you can just right-click on your Perfect Jeweler's Orb, and you can click on your Infernal Cry, or whatever ability that you would like, and you can give it multiple sockets. Now, I noticed that with Encased in Jade, I cannot use it on Encased in Jade because it's a basic skill. I cannot use it on Punch, and I cannot use it on Shred. These skills will gain sockets as you level, and I believe the maximum number of sockets comes at level 90 or 85. I can't remember the exact level. 65 gives you 4. I believe it's 55 gives you 3, and so forth and so on. It's basically as you level, you will get more sockets with your basic and your like gained skills through like ascendancies and things like that. So until I hit level 90, I will not get 5 sockets in these particular skills. They'll be stuck at 4 forever unless I level up. Whereas a skill like Infernal Cry or Scavenge Plating can be increased. So I can take a Perfect Jeweler's Orb, put it on Scavenge Plating, and get myself that coveted 5th socket. Now, it is important to note that the skill gems themselves have requirements for their stats. And as you go through your levels, it's going to increase the requirements of those skill gems. For instance, if I take a level 18 skill gem here, and we go through some of these abilities, you'll see that Ancestral Cry has 137 strength requirement. Infernal Cry, which is only level 17, has a strength requirement of 126, but if I were to upgrade it with the Uncut Skill Gem level 18, you'll notice that it increases to 137. Not only do specific skill gems have a strength requirement and also level requirements, but they also have specific tier requirements that are restrictions, essentially, to those abilities. Like, for instance, if I go into my panel here and I pull out a skill gem that is only a level 3 skill gem, you will notice that I am restricted from being able to create tier 5, tier 6 or 7, tier 9, tier 11, and tier 13 skill gems. Because these specific skills are not allowed to be created until you reach those specific levels. On top of that, they also have specific level requirements which would prevent them from being created anyway in those particular situations. Like, for instance, if I was a level 6 character and I was trying to create one of those abilities, even if I did have a level 5 skill gem to make Perfect Strike, it would be a level 14 ability. It would not be a lower, like level 6 ability that I have access to. So stat requirements go up with skill level. Your level requirement goes up with skill level. And another really important thing that you also have to remember is that the cost of the ability goes up tremendously with skill level. For instance, if you look at a ability like Shockwave Totem, it costs 20 mana at level 3. However, if we take a look at this ability at a higher level, and I grab, say, a level 13 skill gem, you'll notice that Shockwave Totem now costs 58 mana per use. This is a pretty huge increase and something that you have to take into account when you're trying to build a character because, well, you might not want the mana cost to go up. The damage of the ability goes up, yes, but you may not be using the ability for damage. In fact, it might just simply be a ability that you're using for utility, in which case you have to think to yourself, well, do I want the ability to increase in mana requirements and also stat requirements, which would definitely be an issue. There are certain tiers that are generally more valuable than others, and it has to do with the fact of minimum requirements. For instance, if you have a tier 8 skill gem or a tier 8 spirit gem,
Have an order?
it's usually the tier 8 spirit gem, but let's go ahead and put it in here anyway.
What's new?
You notice that this one tends to cost, what, 8 exalts? Let's take a look at the spirit gem instead. So the tier 8 spirit gem costs 240 exalts. And the reason why the tier 8 spirit gem costs 240 exalts is because it is at the border of the skills. So if I pull up a spirit gem here, and we take a look at all gems, you'll notice that a lot of the abilities are in the tier 8 category. Well, if I want to use one of these abilities, but I want a lower level version of it, specifically to avoid the stat requirements. As you can see, Combat Frenzy costs 65 dexterity, and I don't have enough dexterity even as a high level character to put that on. And that's the lowest level requirement of that ability. If I were to use a higher level Spirit Gem, like for instance a level 19 Spirit Gem, and I looked at Combat Frenzy would be a requirement of 147 dexterity, which I'm definitely nowhere near. Right? So the problem becomes, do you have the stat requirements to actually utilize it? Is it increasing the mana cost worth the damage increase that you're getting? Are you actually using this skill for damage? Right? If you are using the skill for damage, it's almost imperative that you increase the skill level of the ability. In fact, the higher level the skill of the ability, the better the damage in general is going to be. However, if you're not using it for damage, then you don't necessarily need to go through all that process. Now, you can give yourself another socket in another way, which is kind of random and doesn't really always necessarily work. It's basically the process of corrupting a gem. Now, I haven't really done a lot of gem corrupting, and I don't really recommend it for the most part because it seems to be mostly a waste of time in the early levels because all it really does is lock your gem in a specific state. But there is a possibility that you can get a fifth socket. So, for instance, right now I have Thunderstorm, which is a level 18 ability, and I could potentially corrupt it and see if I could get something else. I could replace this pretty easily, so let's just go ahead and do it, and let's see what happens. Items sockets are not empty. Okay, it's going to get mad at me unless I desocket it. Alright, so we corrupted it. We did not get an extra socket. Looks like the level remained the same, but the quality increased to 23%, I think. So we got a little bit of extra quality out of it, which wasn't amazing. The downside to this, of course, is that because it's corrupted, I could no longer increase its number of sockets to 5. So keeping this in mind, when you corrupt a gem, you are now stuck with that gem the way that it is forever, essentially. Let me go ahead and demonstrate this by go ahead and purchasing a perfect gem. And I will go ahead and use this on our Thunderstorm gem. And as you can see, it says target is corrupted, failed to apply to item. So if you use a Val Orb on one of your skill gems, it's now locked in that state forever. So it seems kind of silly to me that a lot of people would use Val Orbs on these when they're not, like, at least at 4. If they're at 4, you're chancing to get that 5th, right? But I don't know if it's really worth it right now since the Perfect Jeweler's Orbs are only 41 exalts. Now, in the past, Perfect Jeweler's Orbs have been extremely expensive, and because of the fact that they've been extremely expensive, well, I could see it in the past. But nowadays, not so much. Now, there are also other things that you can get, like, for instance, if you had one that was already full, like, for instance, my Pounce is full, you could try to corrupt it for more quality. You could try to corrupt it for higher level. You could try and corrupt it for various reasons. It depends on what you want to do with it. There is actually some items that will increase the level of corrupted gems, and so forth and so on. More than this, though, like, it really just comes down to the fact that, like, having more sockets is better, and of course having a higher level ability is better when you're dealing with your main damage abilities. Now, moving into the spirit gems are a little bit different. Spirit gems generally require spirit to activate, and they generally tend to provide more passive bonuses than your skill gems do. For instance, right now I'm utilizing 100 of my spirit, as you can see over here on this side. I have 0 out of 100 spirit. If I deactivate Scavenge Plating, I now have 100 spirit. So I'm essentially using all of my spirit in this particular case. Now, what am I getting out of it? Well, I'm getting things like Cannibalism, which costs 30 spirit and give me 3% maximum life recovered on killing monsters. I've got Thorn Skin, which gives me 70% increased Thorns damage while supported skill is active, which is really good for my build specifically. I've also got Physical Mastery in here and Prolonged Duration, which of course increases the time that it takes. Now, with these particular abilities, you usually have to fulfill the requirements of the ability to activate them. In this case, I need to break monsters' armors. But there's like 1,000 spirit gems in this list, and they all do various things. If we go through the list here and just take a look at some of them, there is the Arctic Armor, which gives you the ability to apply cold damage to people when they hit you. It's very similar to Shiver Armor or Chilling Armor in Diablo 2. There's Ghost Dance, which will basically give you the ability to recover Energy Shield based on your evasion rating. There is also the Herald of Ice, which causes the monsters that you shatter to explode. So if you freeze a monster and kill them, they will explode upon death, and they will do massive amounts of damage to monsters around them. There are also things like Scavenge Plating, which I'm using, which gives me armor and thorns damage for breaking people's armor. There are Wind Dancer, which gives you more evasion rating per stage, and then when you're hit, you lose the stages, and it triggers a blast, which knocks monsters away. And overall, the spirit gems are extremely useful to your build, but they are very costly and something that you have to think about whether or not you want to use. Overwhelming Presence is really good because it reduces the monster's threshold to being frozen or ignited or shocked and so forth and so on, so it just generally makes the monsters easier to freeze, shock, etc. Things like cast on critical or cast on elemental ailment allow you to socket a specific spell that can be cast, which will do pretty good damage, depending on how you set it up, or just simply be very good utility, but specifically when you fulfill the requirements. And the cast on elemental ailments, it's when you freeze, shock, or ignite enemies. And the cast on criticals, when you apply criticals to the target, and so forth and so on. So as you are dealing with these spirit gems, you have to fulfill their specific requirements to get a specific bonus, which can most of the time in my situations has always been either A, defensive, or B, like on death, which helps with clear speed, but not bosses. Like, for instance, Herald of Ice doesn't really help with bosses. It is specifically something that is going to help almost primarily with clear speed and not with bosses. Now, when you're dealing with these, you're going to be putting in support gems. So anytime you have an ability, you're going to be thinking about what you want to do with that ability and the purpose of it. There are so many support gems on the list. The first thing that I would really recommend if you were dealing with the gem cutting is I would recommend that you go into the options, go to the interface, and or is it the game? I think it's game. Yes, game. You go to game, and I want you to turn off gem cutting restrictions. Gem cutting restrictions is not helpful at all, and it's going to make your entire like gem cutting life much more difficult. Let's go ahead and we'll take a look at an ability and we'll kind of like follow a thought process on what we're trying to do, right? So let's go ahead and take the gems out of our shred ability for the time being. Now, shred is a shapeshift, werewolf, AoE, melee strike, projectile, trigger, cold, payoff. These are the tags that are associated with this particular ability. Now, if we have a support gem, let's go ahead and take out a couple support gems. We can, of course, look and see what we can put on these abilities. Now, in this particular panel, this is the gem cutting panel. What you're going to want to do is you're going to click on the skill specifically that you want to cut gems for. In this particular case, I want to cut gems for shred. And then in this list, this is only going to show you some recommended gems, and it's not really all that useful. You're going to want to check the box that says Show Recommended Gems, and make sure that's unchecked. This is going to give you a full list of compatible gems. This is not always 100% accurate, by the way, but it's going to give you a full list of compatible gems that you can use for your shred ability. Now, one thing that you could potentially do is you can search for the things that you're interested in. Like, for instance, if I am a Thorns character, I'm going to be looking for Thorns items. So I'm going to search Thorns. And this is going to show me Barbs 3. Supported skills deal your Thorns damage twice on their next hit after you retaliate with Thorns. Or supported skills deal your Thorns damage on their next 6 hits after you retaliate with Thorns. These are both really interesting. Those twice. Yeah. I'm not sure which one of those is better. They're both kind of interesting. And then we have Quill Burst, which is supported skills trigger Quill Burst on their next 3 hits after you retaliate with Thorns, which we can take a look at. Quill Burst. Explosion radius is 1.5 meters, deals Thorns damage to other targets in an area around the triggering target. So in this particular case, we have some interesting options for Thorns for a specific character, and I like them all, right? So let's take a look and let's go ahead and put those in there. So we're going to go ahead and put Barbs 3. Because Barbs 3 seems pretty powerful for our Thorns build. We're also going to throw in Quill Burst, which is going to give us the ability to explode our Thorns onto the targets, which is very helpful. Now, as an ability, we're not really too worried about the damage on Shred, but attacking faster would really be useful. It would be very useful for this particular character. So in this particular case, we are looking at things like Rage 3, which is supported skills grant 5 rage on melee hit, but they also get 15% increased attack speed while you are not at maximum rage. And then we can use things like Crescendo, which is the final strike of the supported skill can be performed twice in succession, and attacks with the supported skills that are not final strikes have 15% more attack speed, which essentially just allows us to attack faster. And we can search for things like these. So we can go and we can click on Shred, we can go to Speed, and we can look for things that will increase our attack speed specifically. There's Rage 3 right there, and there's Crescendo 2. This allows us to get a better idea of how we're going to build our specific skill. Let's deal with a different ability, like Encased in Jade. So Encased in Jade is a buff that we can apply to ourselves, and it gives us a amount of like temporary HP called guard. Well, one thing's for sure is that it would definitely be nice if the guard lasted longer. So we put prolonged duration. Prolonged duration is one of the duration supports. You can either do shorter duration or longer duration. And this allows you, of course, to get more usefulness out of the guard that you're applying. Physical mastery increases the level of the ability, which also in turn increases the amount of guard that is giving you. And then we also have things like efficiency, which makes it cost less, so we can take less on it. Now, sometimes when in these abilities, there's really not a lot you can potentially put on them. Like, for instance, with Encased in Jade, I currently have an empty slot, but what else could I potentially put on there? Rapid casting doesn't make a lot of sense because, well, actually, it is a spell. Huh. What do you know? You know what? There you go. Something that I didn't realize, because of course I didn't realize that it was a spell. But when we do get the 5th slot, let's take a look and see what else we could potentially throw in here. Armor Demolisher breaks 74% more armor. Doesn't do any damage, so it wouldn't break armor to begin with. Prolonged Duration we already have in there. We don't want it to be shorter. We already have Efficiency. We already have a casting speed bonus in there. Physical, that one's done. Supported skills Consume Corpses to increase damage. It doesn't do any damage, so that's no use. Exposure is applied by supported skills, has 20% effect. This ability doesn't apply exposure as far as I'm aware. Supported skills have mana costs converted to life costs. Not very useful, especially since it's supposed to keep me alive. See, none of these are really all that useful for this particular ability, so we might be in a situation where we just don't put anything else on here. Another important thing that you have to take into account is that everything that you throw on an ability can potentially increase the overall mana cost rather dramatically. To give you an example, let's go ahead and pull up an ability like Lunar Blessing. So let's take all the abilities off of Lunar Blessing real quick. All right, and look at the mana cost of Lunar Blessing. It's currently 142 at level 18. Abilities like Batter Shout, which cause the ability to break armor, or rather consume armor break, will increase the cost of the ability by 130%, changing it from 142 mana to 297 mana, which you should be able to see. Yeah, right here. So you see it's 297 mana right now with the ability added. If we take it back out, you see it goes back down to, what, 228 mana? And it seems to have a cost. I think I have a cost increase on my character, too. Which each one of these is going to increase the cost. So now it's 297. Now it's 356. I don't even. It's and then we have this one here, which is Explosion Cry, which is 130% increase. So now we are at 463 mana cost. That's just ridiculous. 463 mana cost. And then we have something like Efficiency, which is going to bring down the mana cost overall, which is very nice. So now we go from 463 to 278. Efficiency can be extremely useful because these support gems can increase the overall cost of the ability rather tremendously. Something that you do have to take into account when you're adding in these support gems. Another thing that you can do with the support gems is you can potentially increase or decrease damage. And something that you have to take into account with support gems, and let's go to all gems real quick because we're going to just look at all of them. There are things like increased or decreased. So increased and decreased is a additive bonus, not a multiplier. This is something that is a small amount of increase, but not exactly the most amazing. Anything that says increased or decreased is small bonuses that will give you small effects. However, there are also more and less. More and less are different than increased and decreased, and more and less will give you multiplicative increases or multiplicative decreases. More and less are very dramatic. For instance, if we go to Elemental Armament 3. Elemental Armament 3 says supported skills deal 12% more attack damage for each elemental element on enemies they hit. So this is a multiplicative increase, which is going to be rather dramatic. You can look at even things like Trying to think here right off the top of my head. Like this one right here, which is Hourglass. Supported skills deal 30% more damage, but they now have a 10-second cooldown. So this is going to multiplicatively increase the damage of the ability by 30%, but will also decrease your ability to cast it dramatically by putting a cooldown on it. These more multipliers, like more area damage, more elemental damage, more hit damage, and so forth and so on, are more dramatic than basically anything. You can have 30% more area damage, and then you can have 30% reduced area damage, and they will not cancel each other out. The 30% more area damage is far stronger than the 30% decreased. So they will basically strongly, this one will strongly affect the ability more so than others. You also have to be careful with some of these support gems that will completely change the way the ability functions. Like, for instance, Brutality will give you 25% more physical damage, but it will also make it so that the skill can deal no chaos and no elemental damage at all, essentially removing any kind of chaos or elemental damage from the attack. This means that you can't freeze, you can't ignite, you can't shock, you can't electrocute, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, because the ability becomes a pure physical type ability, which is a very strong effect. Um, There are, of course, a lot of ways that you can potentially manipulate abilities in very fun ways. And this is something that you have to keep in mind as well. Like, for instance, Spell Cascade is a very fun one that basically allows you to get additional versions of those spells cast next to the ability in, well, no, well, let's just show you what it looks like. So let's just pull up like a low-level gem here. Let's go to Elemental, and we'll just go to... I think we can use it with Frostbolt. Frostbolt's kind of a fun one, too. So Frostbolts, let's go ahead and use our Frostbolt ability. And we cannot put this in this ability. So this is something that I would have known had I actually taken a look at it properly. So for instance, if I go to this ability and I click on Frostbolt, you can clearly see which ones are capable of being put on the ability. And if I look for Spell Cascade, you see Spell Cascade is not here. This is because this particular ability doesn't function with Spell Cascade. Let's find an ability that does. There's a lot of fun ones to use with Spell Cascade. There's a lot of fun skills in general in this game. Volcano is nice, but Volcano has a limit of 1. So unfortunately, Spell Cascade, while it would work, it would require an increase to the number of limit that particular ability is useful for. What abilities can we use for the Spell Cascade? There's so many different options. Let's pull out like a level 9. Frostwall will work. Let's do Frostwall. Alright, so let's take a look at Frostwall before we add Spell Cascade. So there's Frostwall before we add Spell Cascade. And then here's Frostwall after we add Spell Cascade. So as you see, we get additional casts of the ability through the Spell Cascade. Now, if we take Spell Cascade out and do that again, you can clearly see that we're not getting the additional casts anymore with the regular version. It essentially allows you to get more out of the ability or to change how the ability functions in general. And a lot of things work this way. There are support gems that are not designed for damage so much as they are designed for essentially just making the ability work in the specific ways that you're looking for. Like, for instance, if I take Frostbolt and I put on Multi-Shot, Frostbolt turns from a single target ability to a multi-shot ability, which essentially allows you to spread more damage. One of the main problems with the multi-shot thing is that it gives you 25% less damage. So in this particular case, we are getting 2 additional projectiles, but we're also reducing the overall damage of the ability by a pretty tremendous amount. In fact, you can see this reduction. So you can see that my current damage per second is 53.48, and when I put the gem in, it is now 32.43. So I've reduced the overall damage, but I've increased the number of projectiles. And there's a lot of ways that you can potentially increase the number of projectiles of abilities, and this is just one of many. But the support gems specifically allow you to almost customize the abilities in the directions that you would like to go. Keeping in mind that obviously having more projectiles doesn't always mean more damage, but it does, however, make the ability just far easier to utilize, because you're, instead of getting just one projectile shooting out in a single direction, you're getting multiple projectiles shooting out in multiple directions, and it just makes it far easier to spam and cover large areas. I actually had an entire build one season on this particular premise, revolving around spamming as many frost bolts as I possibly could, and it was kind of a fun build. It wasn't exactly the most impressive in terms of damage output, but it was certainly fun. Is there anything else we can talk about with this panel? So the support gem panel also comes with a lot of interesting secondary options. So if you click on this little button right here on your support gem, you get access to a panel which shows you a lot of various information on your ability. You can go over the damage output, the crit chance, the overall ability to freeze and stun and things like that, as well as secondary effects like the ice fragments, and you can look at how those particular abilities work. If you don't want your ability to move, you can check this little box right here that says always attack without moving. And in this particular case, you could potentially turn a moving ability into a standing still ability by utilizing this. If you have multiple weapon sets, you can essentially choose which weapon set you want it to be used at any given time. Like, for instance, if I had an additional talisman on the other hand, I could potentially do something like this, where I pull up my pounce ability, and you'll see down here at the bottom that it shows 1 and 2, and of course there's the always attack without moving. I forgot I was in the way. So this is essentially your ability to choose which weapon set you're going to use the weapon with. If you do not do this, it will just automatically use whichever one that it wants to. However, like for instance, if I had two different weapons on and I wanted to make sure that it was always using weapon 1 or it was always using weapon 2, all I would have to do is uncheck that specific weapon so that it no longer uses those weapons with that weapon. This allows you to have some pretty nice weapon swapping capability where you can go back and forth between different weapons if you need to for specific effects. Like, for instance, you could have one lightning weapon for a lightning skill, and you could have one cold weapon for a cold skill, and you could swap back and forth between them relatively effectively. What else am I missing here on this panel? I know there's tons and tons of things to talk about here. You can look at any of this stuff by holding down the Alt key. And one of the things that you'll see when you look at this is you'll see quality, additional effects from quality. Now, additional effects from quality is something that you can add on. So if you have gem cutter prisms, which are fairly common drops, but you can also purchase them as well. And I think I haven't used up all mine. Okay. So for instance, if I want to increase the quality of a gem, all I have to do is use a gem cutter prism on this to increase the quality. The problem is that some of these do not have the ability to increase the quality with gem cutter prisms. So for instance, any of the basic skills like punch or encased in jade or shred, these do have effects from quality, but they cannot be increased with the gem cutter prisms. Whereas these abilities, like for instance pounce, can be increased with the gem cutter prisms, bringing them up to their maximum total. This one has already been increased. This one has already been increased. Scavenge plating has not been increased to its maximum, so let's go ahead and do scavenge plating. So as you can see, I have 1.5 out of 2 seconds, so I'm going to go ahead and use that on scavenge plating and increase the quality. So the question would then become, how do you increase the quality of abilities like shred? Well, the answer to that question is you have to play a class or go with an ability that will increase the quality of your gems. There are specific things on the board, if I remember correctly, that have to do with quality. To do 5% quality of all skills right there. And I think there's more than that, isn't there? There really is not. There are also specific classes, however, that also allow you to add quality to skills. Like, for instance, the Gemling Legionnaire, I believe, is one of them that gives you quality on skills. And these can potentially help you get even more attack speed or even more whatever that particular quality is going to offer you. These kind of quality bonuses that are going to help out things like Encased in Jade and Shred are things that you have to get elsewhere besides Gem Cutter Prisms. Now, I highly recommend that you quality your gems, especially the ones that are the things that you're actually interested in. So whatever your main ability is, you definitely want to quality it up to the maximum. You want to make sure you have the highest level for the highest amount of damage, and also make sure that you are filling all the support gems with things that are actually going to be useful to your character. Keep in mind that the more support gems you put in there, the higher the mana cost, and things can definitely get tricky. If you're ever wondering like what you can potentially do with an ability, you just need to take a look at all of the tags at the top. For instance, Pounce is a slam, and it is also a mark skill, which means it has the ability to use things that are slam based. So Bramble Slam, which has the slam tag, is compatible with Pounce because, of course, it is a slam ability. So when we use Bramble Slam, we gain access to the little tiny brambles all over the place, which are definitely the things that are going to help us with our thorns damage. We're also getting access to the Holy Descent, which essentially gives us consecrated ground. And you can see the thorns better without the consecrated ground. And basically, these abilities are all going to have access to whatever support gems match up with their specific types, right? Bramble Slam matches up with a slam ability, and Holy Descent matches up with this particular ability because you're jumping through the air, so it's a AoE duration, and this is an AoE ability. So we get to slam down, and we get to make our consecrated ground, which gives us that nice regeneration, and also the reduces the effects of curses and things like that. I actually really love consecrated ground; it's super useful. Now let me go to another character here. Let me see if I can find a crazy character. Maybe that's her. So I promise you that I had created a character specifically designed around casting as many frost bolts as I possibly could. I think this is her, although I'm not entirely sure if she's still set up because they reset her points all the time. And I want to demonstrate this because I need you to be able to see that when it comes to abilities, you can do a lot to change the way that they function and the way that they actually behave. Frostbolt by itself doesn't do any of this stuff, right? But I can essentially force it to through the use of specific things. Like, for instance, when it comes to Frostbolt, I'm using Wild Shards, which is supported skills have a 20% chance to fire 8 additional projectiles in a circle. I'm also utilizing Sire of Shards, which gives you spells fire 4 projectiles in a circle, and spells fire 4 additional projectiles and fire projectiles in a circle. You can also potentially add in other ways of getting even more projectiles from this particular ability. And essentially all I'm doing is creating a character that can spam as many projectiles as possible. Now this build was actually really fun to play, but wasn't exactly the craziest in terms of boss damage, but was super fun to play and clear, because obviously, as you can see, I can spam frostbolts like all over the entire battlefield. Wom, wom, wom. It's fun to look at, but maybe would it be. In general, though, I hope I have educated you about the skill gem system. I hope I didn't leave anything out. Where you get the skill gems, you can get them from the currency exchange, but the currency exchange doesn't pop up until Act 4. So you're going to have to find them for the most part, or, yeah, I mean, it's pretty much just finding them. There are tons of different levels of spirit gems from level 1 all the way to level 20, and then, of course, there's tons of skill gems from level 1 to level 20. If you do get a level 8 spirit gem, I recommend selling it because it is worth a lot. Usually around 240 exalts, if not more. And it can potentially be used to get you a lot of trade material that you can build your character with. Level 9s are not as valuable, but they're okay. Support gems are something that you might struggle with a little bit in the beginning. Level 1 through level 5 support gems, they're not as easy to come by at the start of the game, but eventually you'll get so many of them that you won't have to worry about it. It's not too big of a deal. But definitely hang on to any of the support gems that you get for use. And it might do early on to make sure you're using the correct level support gem for the correct support gem that you're trying to create. Like, for instance, don't use a level 5 to create a level 1 support gem if you have a level 1 support gem there. But later on in the game, you'll have so many that you won't even know what to do with them all. In fact, the rarest support gems, or rather, the rarest like skills slash whatever gems, generally tend to be the highest level ones, like level 20. And also generally the ones that are at the breakpoints, like level 8. Those are the breakpoint ones, which are at specific points so you can use specific skills. Another very important thing to think about when you're talking about your support gems is that your defensive layer can often be tied to your support gems, or your gems. So, for instance, if you choose a gem that has an extremely high intelligence requirement, and you are going in that direction, you will often find that you have to have an extremely high intelligence requirement, obviously, as a result, and your gear is probably going to be in the same vein. So, for instance, if you're using if you have extremely high intelligence, that means you probably don't have extremely high strength or extremely high dexterity. And energy shield equipment is going to be the main thing that you would be looking at there in that case, or energy shield armor equipment, which is a good combination, or energy shield dexterity equipment. But it always kind of leans you in a specific direction when you go with a specific type of skill. For instance, if your skill has extremely high strength requirements, you're now leaning toward armor. If your skill has extremely high dexterity requirements, you are now leaning toward evasion. If your skill has extremely high intelligence requirements, you're now leaning toward energy shield, and so forth and so on. And it's important to keep that in mind when you're thinking about like the skills that you choose, because the skills that you choose are also going to sort of decide like what defensive layer you use. Now, as well as choosing the skills, you also have to choose an ascendancy, and your ascendancy is a big deal when it comes to the skill that you're using. In fact, most of the time, the ascendancy that you choose, or rather the class that you choose, because that's essentially what you're choosing when you choose an ascendancy, is usually based around the skill that you're trying to build. Like, for instance, earlier when I was building a volcano character, I decided that the best character for a volcano character would be a sorceress, and so I built a Stormweaver. And the reason why I built a Stormweaver is because volcano has a maximum limit of 1, and I wanted to increase that maximum limit by using the multiplying squalls, which gives me a +2 bonus to the limit of my elemental skills, which essentially allows me to cast more than one volcano. So instead of only casting one volcano, I have the ability to cast 1, 2, 3, 4. And then the fifth one will delete the fourth one. And so I can cast them all together like this, and then I can pop down something like that, which will cause all sorts of monstrous explosions, and I can just keep spamming them and getting more explosions and more explosions, which is always very nice. The general gist of it, though, is that in this particular case, with Volcano as a skill gem, I realized that this limit essentially was going to hold me back tremendously, and so Stormweaver became a good option for Volcano to try and get that limit removed. There are other ways that you can increase limit, like Overabundance will give you limit increase. You can also use amulets, or rather unique items. There is a unique item called the Idol of Uldern, which gives you access to another limit increase. So instead of 4, now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't know if I'm using Overabundance on here right now. I am. So I have access to 5 at the moment with this particular setup, which is pretty crazy. And of course, you can keep increasing the limit as far as the items and the spells and various uniques and support gems allow you to achieve. Keep in mind, though, that a lot of these things have huge negatives. Like, for instance, Overabundance has a supported skills have 40% less skill effect duration, which basically means that it lasts a lot less time. As you can see right here, my Volcano duration is 6.96 seconds, and if I take off Overabundance, it's now 11.6 seconds, which means my Volcanoes will sit there and burn for much longer, but I get one less of them. Now, the Volcanoes themselves don't really do a lot, like without the slams, so if you don't have the slams involved, it does make things kind of weird. I'm gonna go ahead and put my stuff back the way I had it before I accidentally forget, and then I go play my character and I'm like, why is my character not working? It's broken. This has been a long video, but I feel like there's a lot to talk about when it comes to support gems, and I'm sure I left something out. There's like 1,000,000,000 things with support gems, but in general, your support gems are essentially how your character functions. It's how your abilities work. It's the support gems that you use for your abilities. It's how you set your abilities up to function in the ways that you want them to function. Like, what do you want them to do? Do you want them to be AoE effects? Do you want them to be a support? Are they applying armor break? Are they giving you some sort of like benefit like poisoning the target or bleeding the target? Are you using them for your main damage ability and so forth and so on? These things are very important to the way that your ability functions, and getting them set up properly so that you can make your character work is important. Each individual skill is going to have different ways that they need to be set up. But keep in mind that whatever your main damage ability is should be set up with damage bonus equipment or damage bonus support gems. In other words, like if you're using an ability specifically for damage, then obviously you need that ability to do good damage. If you're not setting your ability up to do good damage, well, then it's not going to do good damage and you're going to fail at killing things. So always sort your abilities in your own mind or however you need to in the different categories. Always sort them by like main damage, support, utility, etc. Like or defensive. Defensive is a good one too. Defensive. Um, and make sure that your support gems are supporting them in those ways, right? If your ability is a main damage ability, then make sure you're supporting it with damage support gems. If you have a support gem or a support skill gem that's doing nothing but supporting, then make sure that it's supporting in the best way that it can. If it's trying to freeze, then make sure it's doing a good job at freezing. If you're trying to make things bleed, then make sure it's doing a good job at bleeding. If it's a utility, like for instance, you're using it specifically for breaking armor, as an example, is a really good option of utility. Then make sure it's doing a good job at breaking armor so that you have your armor broken all the time. And figure out ways to use the support gems to increase that specific function. Defensive, obviously, make sure it's giving you the defensive stuff that you need. Also, defensive stuff can often accompany things like bonuses. Like you can have specific bonuses that will go into the defensive bonuses that will give you more. Like for instance, in this particular case, I can get mana regeneration on top of being a defensive. So as long as my defensive ability is active, I can get mana regeneration as a result. And in this particular case, I'm also using my defensive ability to freeze a target. So my defensive is also becoming utility in this particular case, because if a monster hits me, they get frozen, and then that also helps by triggering my cast on elemental ailment. It all feeds into each other like a nice big chain. Hopefully, I've gone over enough to help you with these skill gems if you have been confused. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me. I'm sure that I've left something out because the game is horribly complicated. As always, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe button if you are interested in more content, and keep watching.